Paul was happened after the book of Acts. Now, chapter 21, verses 1 through 14, concerned Paul's trip from where he was there with the elders to his last stop, which was the port of Caesarea. And at every stop, the believers warned him that bad things were going to happen to him in Jerusalem. But this is the last thing that he said to them. So we'll read chapter 21, verses 13 and 14.
And Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be in prison, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus."
Amen.
And since he would not be persuaded, he ceased and said, "Let the will of the Lord be done."
The will of the Lord be done.
That's we, so that's Luke talking.
Luke
He was there
and
with them.
the Ephesian elders too. And that's right, Luke was with them in this section. So Paul knew he was going to be trouble in Jerusalem, but like Jesus, he was ready. So they left Caesarea, that was the port city, and they traveled overland about 75 miles to Jerusalem. See, Caesarea was where the governor or the procurator, where his regular place was, but he would always visit Jerusalem. Wasn't trouble. So they traveled, and if someone would read verses 15 to 17, chapter 21? Okay, go ahead. 21, 15 to 17.
After these days, we got ready and went up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us, bringing us to the house of Mnason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we should judge. When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly.
Received them gladly. So far, so good. He gets to Jerusalem, and well, he gets to Caesarea, and when he first gets to Jerusalem, he sees some friendly faces, and they receive him gladly. Now, you have to understand that Paul had a group of Gentile believers with him, non-Jews, Gentiles. And they were representatives from all the churches that he had planted. They had all donated gifts for the church in Jerusalem, which was facing hard times. And Paul was happy that for the most part, all had given gladly to the mother church, as they called it, without too much coaxing, except for the Corinthians. In fact, the churches of Macedonia were also having hard times, but insisted on giving, and that blessed them a lot. And I'll just read this myself from 2 Corinthians. "Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift of the fellowship of ministering to the saints." Now that would bless a pastor's heart, wouldn't it? So, gift from the mother church. What could be wrong? Here comes Paul with a gift from the mother church. So someone would read, still in chapter 21, someone would read verses 18 through 21.
On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord. And they said to him, "You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs."
Okay. Now we're getting into church politics. Now the James that he saw was not the Apostle James, it was Jesus' brother James. By that time, he was more or less a de facto leader of the church in Jerusalem. And so James and the elders were busy building the Christian church in Jerusalem, mainly of Jewish converts. And in this new church, there were some Jewish believers who had no problem with Paul converting Gentiles, but there were some who had big problems with it, especially when there was enemies coming in and spreading lies. They said Paul is a traitor, Paul is an enemy of Judaism, trying to destroy the customs and bringing in these filthy Gentiles. So James had his hands full trying to squash the rumors and help the Jewish and the Gentile believers to love each other as brothers. That was no small feat. So this is what F.F. Bruce says, and we're using his book again. This is what Bruce said. Now Paul himself considered himself and all Christians to be free from the Jewish laws, but he respected the Jewish customs. So when he was among Jewish Christians, he followed the Jewish protocol. He would never suggest that Jewish parents not circumcise their children. He knew that Jewish Christians, especially new believers, would still have sensitivities about the law, and he certainly didn't want to make things more difficult for them. So if you've grown up under the law as a Jew, and then it's been preached to you that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, well, you know, I don't want to just throw everything away, because there's in the Jewish laws and customs, there's a lot of love and a lot of joy that goes around. If someone would read 21 verses 22 to 24.
I'll read it. 22 through what?
22 to 24.
What then should be done? They will certainly hear that you have arrived. Therefore, do just what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take these men and purify yourself among them, and pay their expenses for the temple offerings, so that they may shave their heads. Then everyone will know that there is nothing to the things that they have been told about you, but that you yourself also follow and keep the law.
Okay. Now we talked about the Nazarite vow on the previous one, where someone with a special need, he would take this vow, and for I forget how long, maybe months and months, he would not cut his hair. He might shave his head originally so that his hair would start growing out, but he would not, no razor would touch his head. He couldn't drink any wine. He had to stay pure. He could not touch a dead body, even if one of his family was killed. He couldn't help them. And when the time was over, he would go to the temple and make a sacrifice, and they would shave his head and they would throw the hair in there with the sacrifice. And that was the Nazarite vow. And so any other Jew who would pay expenses for them, that was considered a good charitable act, and that's what Paul did. Now Bruce points out that nowhere does it say that the Jerusalem church accepted the gifts that they gave him. And this is a mystery. It could be because James and the elders didn't think that accepting gifts from Paul and his Gentiles would set well with these anti-Paul, anti-Gentile crowd. So, yeah, Paul, we'll accept the gift after you show us that you're a true Jew. Now, I wouldn't accuse Jesus' own brother of setting a trap. Maybe the others put a squeeze on him. But in any case, Paul was well aware of what could happen, but he was trusting God to direct him. And you know what happened. You remember about the soreg. Everybody remember about the soreg?
Said that was something like somebody couldn't cross.
Yeah. I got 5 handouts. Who would like a handout? Who doesn't already have a soreg handout? Yeah, give them per family. There's 5 of them there.
I know Don.
I'll give one to Brady, because he hasn't seen it. That's in the temple.
Old tap boots.
So
It's outside.
Well, they had outside of them,
he wanted me to do. And yet, I'm reading here that in the early church, they were still holding on.
Well, that meant a lot to the Jews. I mean, that was the whole thing that separated them from the nations. And it was a law given from Moses thousands of years before and kept all the way down there to the present. And you probably, if you were to go back to a Catholic church, you'd notice some of the beautiful things about it.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's the temple. You all know the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, right? Big thing. I think they said it would take 10 football fields. Anyway, that was the Temple Mount. And there in the middle of it was the temple. Now, the temple had a wall around it. And if you look at the paper there, you'll see a cross section of that wall, and you'll see a little diagram. The wall went around, and what it separated was Gentiles from Jews. Any Gentiles, remember we talked about the what do they call them? God-fearing Gentiles. They could come to the temple, they could come to that wall, they could kneel, they could pray there, but they could not cross over there. On the other side of that wall was the court of the women. That's as far as the women were allowed to go. Then came the court of the men. That was as far as they were allowed to go. And the court of the priests, and then the inner sanctum there. So they were very serious about it. If you look there, it's amazing. They found, they've never found anything from the temple, but they found this block. This was one of the original blocks that was on that wall. It's written in Greek, and this is what the Greek says on it. No stranger is to enter within the balustrade round the temple and enclosure. Whoever is caught will himself be responsible for his ensuing death. All right, so, this had to be a big deal, a really big deal. Because, remember, the Romans were in charge, the Romans liked order, the Romans would allow Jews certain things. But Roman law would not allow anyone but Romans to put a death sentence on somebody. But they made this one exception for the temple that the priests and them could carry out an execution without consenting the Romans. So that's how big of a deal it was, very big. So Paul entered the temple with these Jewish believers. They were allowed to be in there. He was a Jew, they were a Jew. No rules were broken. What's going on? Anyway, no rules were broken, but there were some Jews from Asia who were in town for the Feast of Pentecost, and they spotted them, and they told everyone that Paul brought Gentiles into the temple, into the sacred precincts. And that's what brings us to this. That's why this big rush, this big violence. He had to be carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. And the multitude of the people followed after, crying out, "Away with him." I'm going to summarize some things because there's 4 more chapters to go before Paul ever get on a boat to go to Rome. So, while he's still with the soldiers on the steps of the fortress of Antonia, he asks permission to speak to the crowd. He raises his hands, and there is silence. He speaks to them in Hebrew, and it gets even quieter. And he gives the full story of his conversion. You all know the story of Paul's conversion from Acts 9. This is the second of the 3 accounts, and it's the longest because he adds a few things that weren't in chapter 9. We'll just read the last few sentences. If someone will read 22:19 to 21.
And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in the synagogue, after another, I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed, I myself was standing by,
someone read 22 to 29 right now.
Up to this world they listened to him. They raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for you should not be allowed to live." And as they were shouting and throwing off their clothes and flinging dust in the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. But then they had stretched him out for the whip. Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." So the tribune came to him and said, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "I bought the citizenship for a large sum," Paul said, "but I am a citizen by birth." So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him.
Okay, two things. You see at the beginning, they listened to the whole speech until he said, "I will send you far away to the Gentiles." Then it exploded. And also, the commander, they ordered him to be brought in and to be tortured. He wanted to know why these people were so mad, and that was their way of doing it, was to torture the guy until he told. And Paul says to him, he says, "Are you going to do this to someone who's a Roman citizen?" And when he said that, whoa, everything changed. Now we've heard sermons that in the time was right for the birth and the spread of Christianity because the Roman Empire had its system of roads. The use of Greek and Latin was throughout the empire. And there was the Pax Romana. You've probably remember that from history. Pax Romana was Romana, not Romano. Romana was a time of peace from when Augustus started the empire at 27 BC all the way till 180 AD. There was a time of peace, relative peace. And it's pointed out in the commentaries that Luke tends to portray Roman authorities in a favorable light, noting that the Roman system of justice works out to Paul's advantage in many episodes. For instance, if you remember, when the mob at Ephesus dragged Paul into the theater shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," and the town clerk quieted them down, warning them that the Roman overseers demand order in their provinces. And so the law worked for them. Or that time in Philippi when he and Silas were beaten with rods and thrown into prison with their feet in stocks. And when the magistrates found out he was a citizen, they rushed to the jail to apologize and beg him to leave town. So, compared to other parts of the world at that time, the Roman legal system was the fairest and the most civilized in the world. It was especially fortunate that Paul was a Roman citizen. Then you wonder, how did this Jew become a citizen of Rome? You know, not just everybody got that. I mean, in some of his letters, he's saying, "I was a Hebrew of Hebrews. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. You know, I was a real go-getter as far as the church went." So he wouldn't be one of these Jews who kind of got along with the Romans and that, but he kept himself to the law strictly. And so, according to Bruce, if he was born a citizen, it must mean his father was a citizen. Now, originally, only people born in Rome could be citizens, but as the empire expanded, people of other places could be conferred with citizenship if they had performed some extraordinary service to Rome, military, financial, whatever. And so evidently Paul's father, or his grandfather, or his great-grandfather had rendered some outstanding service to the Roman cause, but no one knows what it was. So back to our story. Everybody get that about the story? That picture there sometimes on the one side, it's a cross section. Okay. After declaring that he's a Roman citizen, from that moment on, he's protected by Roman law. Soldiers defer to him. They can't just grab him and yank him around. He is held, but he's not held in some horrible dungeon. And a Roman citizen cannot be crucified. That was an absolute. No Roman citizen could be crucified. And that's why the historians agree, maybe, that at the end of his life, he's not crucified like Peter, he's beheaded, which is a more humane form of execution. So the next day, they brought him before the Sanhedrin, and this is what happened. Someone will read chapter 23, verses 6 through 10.
But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees,
Oh, now the setting is he's before the Sanhedrin, and they're all discussing things and arguing about him, and then this happens.
and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. You want to read 7 too?
Yeah.
And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided.
Keep going.
For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God.
And 10.
Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks.
Okay, trouble, and more trouble. So evidently Paul knew his Roman law and he knew his Jewish law too, and he knew that the scribes, the Pharisees and Sadducees had these different beliefs, and so he pitted them against one another and got out of that one. But the Lord was with him. And verse 11 says, The following night the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome. Okay, so that shows Paul didn't see Jesus on the road to Damascus. There was other times when Jesus would appear to him and would speak to him. So Paul must have thought, Rome, yeah, I want to go to Rome. But not yet. That day, that very day, a band of more than 40 Jews made an oath that they would neither eat nor drink until they killed Paul. They went to the chief priests and told them their plan. If someone would read 23, 14, and 15.
They went to the chief priests and elders and said, We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food until we have killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near.
But Paul's nephew heard about it. That's the Lord helping again. And he went and told the commander, and the commander told him not to tell anybody because he took it very seriously. You know, by this time, the Romans must have been shaking their heads. What in the world is it about this guy that they wanted so bad to tear him apart? Someone read 23 through 30.
And he called for 2 centurions, saying, Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Go to
Caesarea.
Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely to Felix, the governor. He wrote a letter in the following manner. Claudius,
All these places.
to the most excellent governor, Felix, greeting. This man was
talk about an important prisoner. 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to escort him to Caesarea. And under the cover of darkness, you know, Romans aren't chicken, you know. They could have got away with a handful, but commander saw that there was something about this guy that the Jews might cause a riot. And so the commander must have wondered what in the world caused the Jews to hate Paul so much. But maybe Governor Felix could figure it out. So they got him safely to Caesarea, gave the letter to the governor. The governor said, "I will hear you when your accusers also have come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. That sounds like first-class treatment. That's not a prison. So after 5 days, the high priest and the elders came down from Jerusalem, and they brought a professional orator named Tertullus. They were going to do this the right way before the governor. Now, Tertullus, he gave a flattering introduction to Felix, and then he gave this exaggerated charges against Paul. And someone would read chapter 24, verses 5 to 9.
For we found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander, Josias, came by and with great violence took him out of our hands. Commanding the Jews to come to you by examining him yourself in vain, concerning all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also descended maintain that these things were so.
This man is a plague. He's turning the whole world. He's a ringleader and tried to profane the temple. And this is funny. He says, we wanted to judge him, but the commander came by and with great violence took him out of our hands. After he read the commander's thing, he said, I had to rescue him from these guys. So Paul then gave his defense, if someone would read 10 through 21.
Then Paul, after the governor had nominated him to speak, answered, "Inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of the nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogue or in the city. Nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me." Keep going.
Yeah.
All right. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets.
Keep going all the way to 20.
How far are we going?
To 21, actually.
Sorry. I have hope in God, which they themselves also have said, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and man. Now after many years I came to bring aims and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews, when they found
there's the mention there of the gift. He says, I came to bring the gift, but look what happened. But here again, he's saying, I'm being judged because I believe in the resurrection of the dead, both the just and the unjust. And I think Felix is a little bit shaken by this talk of resurrection of just and unjust, because I think he was on his third wife at that time. So he procrastinates. He says he'll make his decision when the commander comes all the way down from Jerusalem. And he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide or visit him. And that sounds okay, thought Paul, why can I go to Rome? So Felix came back with his wife a little bit later and called for Paul again. She was a Jewess, that's right. And if someone would read verses 24 to 26.
Several days later, Felix came with his wife, Drusilla, who was a Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him talk about faith in Jesus Christ. But as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, honorable behavior, personal integrity, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for now, and when I find a convenient time, I will send for you." Keep going.
Who was that?
26.
Yeah.
At the same time, he also was hoping to get money from Paul as a bribe, so he could continue to send for him quite often and talk with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was unsuccessful in office by Pontius Festus, and wishing to
That's
do
good.
Festus for the rest of us, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison.
Okay. So he still was in a dungeon, and he was allowed to see his friends, allowed to have liberty, but he still was in chains. And now there's 4 letters in the New Testament that are called the prison epistles, if you've heard of that. That's Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. All of those letters, Paul says he's writing from prison, that he's a prisoner. Now there's some debate as to for which imprisonment each one was written, because Paul was imprisoned a lot, in a lot of different places. Many scholars think that his imprisonment in Rome is the best candidate, but I think, others think that 1 or 2 could have been written from Caesarea there. But anyway, he had the time, and whether all his letters survived, but I'm sure that he wrote a lot. So, kept him for 2 years. I thought I was going to Rome. 2 years hoping he'd offer him a bribe. Okay, and he was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but he still kept Paul as a favorite of the Jews. And if someone would read chapter 25, verses 1 through 8.
Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let him bring charges against him. After what verse 2? This is 16.
Oh, go all the way to 8.
Okay, I'm sorry. After he stayed among them, not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense.
lot of passion in those Jews, but their arguments fell through. But this next passage changes everything, if someone would read 9 through 12.
Festus, but Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things?" So Paul said, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know, for if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one will deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar." Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, "You have appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you shall go."
Yeah, finally. Finally. So like I say, Paul knew his Roman law. And he knew he could appeal to Caesar and have his case judged right there at the Capitol. You know, that's something to say that you could go right before the emperor. You better know what you're doing. Although it said that it wasn't always the emperor who did the judging. Sometimes they delegated it to one of the senators. But Paul had still one more defense to go through. If someone would read 25:13 to 22.
Let me do it again. Now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them, but it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face, and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charges laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points to dispute with him about his own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear the man myself tomorrow," he said, "and you will hear him."
That's right. This is Herod Agrippa. And it's hard to get all the Herods in order. Okay? There's Herod Archelaus and there's something else. But anyway, he was a great-grandson of Herod the Great. And he was the last of the Herod dynasty. And he was kind of a Jew. Just like Herod. Herod was not fully a Jew. He was half Edomite. And so the Jews always kind of looked slanted at him, even though he built the temple so beautiful, they still didn't like him. So at this time, Herod Agrippa the Romans gave him the kingdom of the region north and east of Galilee, and they gave him the authority of appointing and deposing the high priests of Israel. Now that would rankle the Jews. Here's this guy not a real Jew, and he gets to choose who's the high priest, and of course he would give it to his friends, and they would all kiss up to him. So this Herod Agrippa and his sister Bernice, you see, Felix was writing to them saying, "I don't know what to say about this guy." Remember when he first came over, the commander wrote to Felix, "I don't know what to say about this guy." So Festus saying, "I don't know what to say about him either." But Herod Agrippa and his sister, they should have a little bit more knowledge of Judaism. So If someone would read 25 verses 23 to 27.
So the next day, Agrippa and his sister Bernice came with great pageantry, and they went into the auditorium, accompanied by the military commanders and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Then Festus said, King Agrippa, and all you gentlemen present with us, you see this man, Paul, about whom all the Jewish people appeal to me, both at Jerusalem and here, loudly insisting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing worthy of death. However, since he appealed to the Emperor Nero, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing specific about him to write to my Lord, so I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the investigation has taken place, I will have something to put into writing. For it seems absurd and unreasonable to me to send a prisoner to Rome without indicating the charges against him.
Okay.
This reminds me of Jesus' trial.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with him either, and send him back and forth.
Yes, in the
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And
Did he turn Agrippa to a Christian?
he tried to. He tried to. So here, if you look through the encyclopedia, you'll see paintings of Paul before Agrippa, and you'll see King Agrippa and his sister and all the commanders, everybody decked out. And here's just this one bald guy in chains talking to him. Nobody remembers who they are. Everybody remembers who Paul is.
Yeah.
So that's what history is. Okay, so Agrippa gives Paul permission to speak, and Paul gives his conversion story again. This is the third time in the book of Acts, and it gives some different details too. When the light strikes him blind, that part, on the road to Damascus, and Jesus speaks to him, and he asks, "Who are you, Lord?" And if someone would read chapter 26, verses 15 to 19. This is what Jesus said to him.
Why do you persecute me?
That's what he first said.
Who are you?
You said 15?
15 to 19.
So I said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you to open their eyes, in order to turn them from the darkness to the light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me.
Hallelujah.
It's worth it to read all three versions of this, because there's always something in there. But then if someone would read verses 24 to 32.
And while Paul was making this defense, Festus said loudly, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great education is turning you toward madness. But Paul replied, I am not out of my mind, most excellent and noble Festus, but with a sound mind I am uttering rational words of truth and reason. For your majesty, the king understands these things, and therefore I am also speaking to him with confidence and boldness, since I am convinced that none of these things escape his notice, for this has not been done in order hidden from view or in secret. King Agrippa, do you believe the writings of the prophets, their messages, and their words? short time and with so little effort, he almost persuaded me to become a Christian.
Almost persuaded.
That's a famous line.
Yeah, someone wrote a song about that, almost persuaded, lost. Finishing up sooner than I thought. The next chapter begins with Paul's journey, but I stopped here because there's so much to tell about that. So, but I will leave you with this. In Romans 15, I was looking in Romans 15 because Paul says to the Romans there, I hope that I can see you on my way to Spain. He didn't know he was going to be brought there in chains. He thought he was going to stop off and then go on. But I also saw here what he was writing in Romans 15 to the Jews and Gentile. Therefore accept one another, just as Christ also accepted you to the glory of God. For I say that Christ became a servant of the circumcised on behalf of God's truth, to confirm the promises to their fathers, and so that Gentiles may glorify God for his mercy. As it is written, and he quotes from the Old Testament, therefore I will praise you among the Gentiles, and I will sing praise to your name. Again it says, rejoice you Gentiles with his people. And again, praise the Lord, all you Gentiles, let all the peoples praise him. And again, Isaiah says, and we know this one, the root of Jesse will appear, the one who rises to rule the Gentiles will hope in him. And that's the root, that's right, David is the root of Jesse, and Jesus is the root of David. And he says, now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you believe, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The end.
So when Pastor talks about the resurrection is actually the crux or the crux of Christianity, that's what Paul is defending here.
Yes. Yes. Not in so many words. He tailored his messages to the people he was talking to. But, yeah, he gave it out there. He said there, that was Jesus talking to him. And,
You think God picked him because he was really intelligent?
what's that?
Do you think Jesus picked Paul because of his great learning and all this stuff?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
And because he's so dedicated to what he believes.
You know, of the prophets,
You
God says, I knew you before you were born, and I chose you. So yeah, he was a unique person, because he came from Tarsus. That was a pretty prominent city. And he was a Jew, a family of very devoted Jews, but he also had that Roman citizenship. He received great learning. He probably received regular learning, and then they sent him to live in Jerusalem to sit under Gamaliel, the greatest rabbi that ever was. And so he knew his stuff. He could do it. I'll take questions now.
Well, I'm just wondering, why is it that how do you say it, Sadducees and the Pharisees, like, why would the Sadducees not believe in the resurrection? Like, I don't know, why would they even follow God if they had no hope in anything?
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me.
The more you read about Jewish history, the more there was more than just the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were the big guys, but there were other sects that believed certain different things. But the Pharisees, they were the people that kept the law strict, and the people loved them because they were the real thing. The Sadducees, that's where they got the priests, chose them from the Sadducees. They were the ones that, we need to get along with the Romans, so, you know, we'll talk with Pilate, we'll have our little talks and that. And I don't think they would like to believe that they were going to be resurrected, just and unjust. In fact, anyone who doesn't know Jesus Christ should be afraid of the resurrection of the just and the unjust.
They were so sad, you see.
Ah.
Now we can
I
remember
learned
how
that from Pastor Eric.
There you go.
I have a point for you.
Yes,
So, the sects of Jewish is sort of like maybe our denominations of the Christian
Yeah.
religion?
that's a lot like it.
Okay,
That's a lot like it.
that's all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
When I was looking up F.F. Bruce on Wikipedia, and it said that he grew up in the Plymouth Brethren, and so that I had to think over to the Plymouth Brethren, which was a sect in England that came off of the Church of England, and then they divided again. This guy, you've probably heard of the Scofield Bible. Okay, so this guy, his name was it Drake? But anyway, he split with the brethren because he got into an argument with another pastor about the end times and whether there would be a tribulation, whether there would be rapture before the tribulation. That caused him to split and start his own denomination. So now, I heard a story once that, Jesus healed blind people. One guy he healed, he put mud on his eyes. And so these two blind men who could now see, they met each other in Jerusalem. And one of them said, Jesus healed me from my blindness. And he said, well, how did he do it? He says, he made mud, put it on my eyes, and then I could see. And the other guy said, he didn't do anything to me and I could see. He said, no, you got to have the mud put on your eyes. I said, no, he didn't. I said, so from that conversation
That wasn't the important
came
thing.
the Faith Baptists and the mud spit in your eye Methodists.
That's said by a used to be Methodist.
We can take more questions.
Why do you like Paul so much?
I like it.
He's unlike anybody in the
I
Bible.
guess his book made me like him even more. It's,
He's gone more through Christ. I mean, he's the only one that went more through Christ than anybody else.
Yeah.
He was shipwrecked for it. I mean, sometimes when I think about that, like, how could one person deal with all? How could he be shipwrecked, stoned, and all this other, thrown in prison, and be happy and still write the Bible?
Depends on God.
well, if he had Jesus appearing to him and talking to him,
Yeah,
that would make up for it.
don't you think that would affect you if you saw Jesus physically? It was in my attention.
See, the reason I like this book too is because he takes, we have the story of Paul in the book of Acts, and then we have all these letters from Paul, and it's hard to line them up, what he's speaking about. But F.F. Bruce does a really good job of putting them together.
You shared that comment with Paul. He's your man.
Yes, and my great learning has driven me mad.
Where?
Paul, after he got converted, right, he went
No, honey,
and
ours is in the trunk.
ministered by Jesus.
That's in the next book. So you have to wait for Pastor Eric to get sick again.
They keep their own.
Let's say first